I typically talk to my clients at the beginning of the representation, and I tell them only a fool lies to their defense counsel. I'm going to take everything you tell me and assume that it's true.
Right.
And I'm going to rely on it as if it is the truth. If we find out later that it wasn't true, it's going to go really bad.
Right.
And I've had that happen. Of course, I think many attorneys have had that experience. It's horrible. It's one of the worst experiences you can have.
Right. Welcome to Inside the Polygraph. I'm your host, David Goldberg, expert polygraph examiner. Join me as I and my guests break down the facts, fictions of polygraph testing, law enforcement, and so much more. Real cases, real conversations. The truth is always revealed inside the polygraph.
I had a case one time where this particular CO, he was a very senior guy, and he was good. He invited me to these meetings where my client was being told the bad things that were about to happen to him. I don't know why. I don't often get invited to meetings like that, but I'm also not turning it down. And if he asked me, hey, do you have anything to add? And my client had tested positive for methamphetamines.
Okay.
He was an incredibly high-performing, high-functioning member of the military with a perfect record and like a family life that was completely inconsistent. Meth is not a casual drug, and nor is cocaine or any of these very highly addictive substances. And I told the CEO, I said, and I wish more would do this. Look at your sailor.
Correct.
Look at him.
They don't.
They shut it off when they get that drug result because what has the Navy beat into everybody's head?
Nanograms.
Well,
that's what they
there's
beat.
that, but in a broader sense, it's zero tolerance.
Sure.
Zero tolerance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zero tolerance.
Right.
Zero tolerance. And they parrot it back to you like robots.
Right.
And you're just like, man, you got to think. You got to think. Think about what that means here. And that's the distinction I make at the boards, and it's a compelling argument that I'm able to walk people through. Zero tolerance applies to intentional, knowing, voluntary use of drugs.
Correct.
Does not apply to accidental or innocent ingestion.
Right. And that's what I test when I test about that intentional use.
Sure.
In reference to the boards, the separation boards, and in reference to court martials and in the civilian side, there is a less preponderance that you have to show in reference to evidence. Am I correct?
Well, yeah. So at an administrative board, it's a preponderance finding rather than beyond a reasonable doubt finding that you would run into at a court martial. So it's a preponderance finding, which is a lower burden of proof. Some people call it 51%. More likely than not, that's the standard. And there's also no rules of evidence.
Okay.
There's no right of discovery. There's no subpoena power. The administrative hearings, it's kind of the Wild West.
Right. Because they pick whatever rank you are, they're going to pick 3 board members, or sometimes I've seen actually 4 to be on there, of your peers, supposedly.
Yeah, so there'll be senior people.
Right, correct.
Typically for enlisted folks, I see 2 officers and a
Right.
senior enlisted person.
Right.
That's commonly what we see.
And they listen to the witnesses. And then, of course, they're allowed to question the witnesses,
Absolutely.
the panel. And then, of course, you have the prosecution, and then you have the defense attorneys. They question the witnesses. And then overall, the panel makes the final decision.
Yes.
And that usually takes anywhere from how many days or hours usually?
Depends on the service. DOD does a great job. Theirs are usually to present the case is a half day. So typically you convene it. They read your client all the rights, and then we still do binders. So it's not very modern because everybody comes in with these binders for everybody.
Right.
So then you break and let them read their binders. Once they read the evidence, you come back in, present any witnesses, and then they recess to deliberate. So, I mean, more often than not, you're doing it in one day or less, sometimes half or 3/4 of a day. The Coast Guard's procedures are far more complicated, and those are typically multi-day hearings.
And our court martials set up sort of like the civilian courts. I mean, are they actual trials where you have a jury?
Oh, yeah.
You do? Okay.
Well, it depends on the forum. So the accused can make that forum election, but they also have judge-alone forum in the military.
They do.
Where there's no juries.
Okay.
Those are a little more efficient, but selecting a panel and all of that takes time.
Okay. So you still have voir dires as well?
Yeah,
okay. You
sure.
do. All right. Let's get into polygraph testing.
Mm-hmm.
In law school, they probably teach you how much of polygraphs?
I don't recall it coming up. I remember learning the federal rules of evidence,
right,
about polygraph exams, but that's basically it.
Right. And reading, obviously not admissible.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we know in court martials, absolutely no.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, though, in administrative boards, they are brought in.
Yeah, I think the Army does not allow polygraphs at their admin hearings, but every other service that, to my knowledge,
right.
does
And
allow
I know in civilian sides, and I can testify to this myself personally, what's brought in and what is permitted, depending on the defense and the prosecution and a judge, the only thing that will be brought in reference to polygraphs would be the polygraph reports.
Right.
Never the charts. I always tell people when they always ask me, are the polygraphs admitted? And I always say, what's admitted will be my professional opinion, my polygraph reports.
Right.
You're obviously a very experienced attorney. I want to know why you personally use polygraph for your clients. Not all, of course, not all, but you do use them. I want to know why you use them and why it helps you and your clients.
So I think sometimes, so I always recommend them when clients can afford them, especially in an admin hearing or even a notice response. I think a polygraph exam can indicate, I run into a variety of opinions on what the significance of a polygraph means, but I think it always indicates confidence of the accused in their own innocence. So that's a step, and that's why I recommend people do it, is because you can hold it up and say, even if I'm not holding it up and saying, hey, well, this is, this says he's innocent, so he's innocent. I don't ever really say that, but the argument I would make is, hey, he went under the gun, hooked himself up to a machine, and expressed his innocence, and that should give you a lot of confidence in relying on his statements that he's innocent. Like, because who would do that? Why would you subject yourself to that if you weren't going to pass?
Right. As an attorney, you have had, and I'm sure you're going to say what I think you're going to say, okay? Mm-hmm. You've had clients lie to you.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was going to, because then I would have called you a liar on this sofa. So as attorneys do get lied to, just like law enforcement officers, just like judges when they hear cases, everyone gets lied to.
Sure.
You, as an attorney, I would assume, and I hate that word, but I would assume that sometimes when you talk to your clients at times, you obviously want to represent them to the highest level.
Right.
And there might be times that when you listen to your client, even though you want to believe them, there may be times that you just want to make sure so that you don't look like a fool or an idiot in front of the judge.
Right.
That you might want to have everything, the entire facts. So you may want to get them to be polygraph tested to get everything out.
Yes. So we, in the work I do, the decision whether or not to put your client on the stand or something like that, those are important. I typically talk to my clients at the beginning of the representation, and I tell them only a fool lies to their defense counsel. Like, I'm going to take everything you tell me and assume that it's true.
Right.
And I'm going to rely on it as if it is the truth. If we find out later that it wasn't true, it's going to go really bad.
Right.
And I've had that happen. Of course, I think many attorneys have had that experience. It's horrible. It's one of the worst experiences you can have.
Right.
So yeah, I could see the attraction, and certainly in a high stakes case with a lot on the line, I could see having that kind of polygraph done to bolster your own confidence in the testimony you have. I'm sure I could see that for sure.
And witnesses lie, correct?
Oh yeah.
And would you say that they put a lot of weight on law enforcement and law enforcement witnesses when it comes to certain aspects of criminal charges, or would you say that they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a pretty common line of questioning and voir dire when you're impaneling a jury, is to ask them, can they weigh law enforcement officer testimony appropriately, not give them additional credibility just because they're wearing a uniform and everything. And a lot of times, juries will tell you that they do, but I think
But they don't.
It's inherent
Correct.
in the human experience that you just rely on
Right.
a uniform is
Right.
indicating that there's a level of credibility and trust that.
And that's why, matter of fact, there's a recent issue that's going on with a local law enforcement, which, I never mentioned anything, but where the local law enforcement made a major mess up with an informant or a witness. They got a search warrant, and they went to a house, and they went to the wrong house and did some really bad things in the house.
That sounds horrible.
And so, yeah, that is horrible. And my feeling, and, some federal agents do it, they do it really well, but they polygraph test their witnesses, or they polygraph test their informants to make sure before we go and, something goes really awry and someone gets hurt, shot, killed, or we break into the wrong house and officers get hurt, or we should do something like that.
Sure.
And that's why I always say, attorneys like yourself, I commend you, not because you've used me, not at all, but I commend you for using more tools in your toolbox, where some attorneys will say, no way, no way, no way. But I think when an attorney or other professionals say no way, no way, I think you're ultimately hurting your client.
Yeah, I wouldn't take any opportunity to help my client off the table, for sure. So, if there's a tool there that will help them, I'm interested.
That's good. And would you say, as an attorney, and I know you're not mentioning names and you're not really bad-mouthing, but I'll tell you the truth. I bad-mouth some people in my profession, not by names, but in every profession you have bad seeds.
Sure.
Would you say that there are people that are underrepresented because of poor representation at times? Meaning that they may not, when I say underrepresentation, meaning they might not see their client as often as they should, or they might not take the time to understand the case as much. And then it's like hearing time or trial time, and they're not prepared enough, and that might hurt their client.
Well, sure. I think it's kind of a truism that, attorneys that are the more prepared attorney in any case is going to prevail. Preparation and hard work and diligence and thorough preps, that's all central to what we do. Right. And the person who typically works the hardest and is the most prepared will win the case.
And an attorney that has passion for their client is important to that client.
I think so. That can backfire on you. I think it's important for attorneys. One of the values you add to the case, to your client, is not being emotionally invested and helping them make objective decisions that are in their best interests outside of the conflict.
Right. And when I say invested or emotionally, I'm not talking about, oh my God, I bleed for this person. I'm talking about you believe in protecting them. That's what I meant. I'm not talking about you like them or you love them. I'm talking about that they came to you for help.
Right.
You're there for them because you want to help them is what I meant.
So the way I do that, my passion that stays constant across cases, because I think if you attach your passion to the client, it can cause you to take things that the other side does personally, and it kind of becomes about you.
Okay.
And you're not going to do a good job. Right. That's going to cause you to perform worse.
Correct.
The passion I tap into in all of my cases, and it stays the constant across all cases, is my obligation to put the government through their paces. I make them do the work. If you're going to get a conviction, if you're going to convict someone of a federal crime and use federal power to hurt them, you don't get to cut corners. You don't get to do it halfway. You don't get to do it just because you think it's the right thing. You're going to prove every element of every charge by the applicable standard of proof, and I'm not going to let you cut corners. I'm going to make your job as hard as I can.
That's good.
And so I fight for that in every single case. And I take that obligation very, very seriously.
That's really commendable of you. What's the hardest case that you've had to thus far? I mean, every case is different, obviously, and some cases are similar. What's the hardest case that you've had to defend thus far?
So that's a hard question. It's a difficult question to answer because they're hard for different reasons. So I've certainly had cases where, from a legal standpoint, the allegations were very complex. So it required a lot of time and a lot of effort to get smart on the law and to know the law and appreciate the nuances.
I'm talking about the situation. That's what I meant.
Well, so I represent a lot of young people.
Okay.
When a young person's accused of a felony, it's just super high stakes.
Okay.
There's a lot of stress.
Because it's their life.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I think, and I've had other cases where mental health is an issue. Veteran mental health is something that we run into in our practice all the time. I've had clients attempt to hurt themselves.
Sure.
Think about hurting themselves. It's something we deal with in every single case.
You're talking about due to PTSD?
I'm talking about just through the experience.
Okay, I got you.
Just going through. I mean, I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. I wish the military community did a better job of supporting people going through trials. There's this kind of intuitive response from other members of the military to distance themselves from people going through experiences like this.
Right.
That compounds the problem. But it all starts with somebody having their integrity, questioned. So when I would say almost every person in the military takes on that as part of their identity.
Sure.
It becomes who they are.
Right. Well, of course.
So when you have the system tell you you're dishonorable, you've messed up, you're bad.
Right.
That's devastating.
Well, I have a statement in my my office, and I tell people this, and it resonates with so many people when they come to me. I always say this to them. You can use it too when you talk to them. I say, your past does not define who you are. Your past does not. Everyone has a past. Everyone. I don't care who you are. I say, we're going to deal with what you're here for today. So let go of whatever's bothering you in your past. We're going to deal with what's happening right now in this office. And then they look at me and they go, oh my God. It's like the burden is just like, because you hit it on the nose. Those individuals have such heavy burdens, those military individuals, and they think that is really defining who they are. That one word, you're dishonorable, you're a piece of crap, you did this, even though they didn't, but, and then everyone else, rumor mill, hey, did you hear Joe did this?
Sure.
And then it's like, that's who they now are defined as. And it just really weighs heavy on them. And like you said, someone that's young, that's going to really destroy their psyche.
It's tough. It really is. I have a similar reassuring point that I try to make with my clients is that the allegations don't define who they are.
Right.
That they're the same person they were before these happened.
Right.
Same exact person.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's important to remember.
Without doubt. Let me keep going. Have you been accused of one of the following in your life, such as infidelity, custody matters, CPS investigations, or serious criminal matters that you're currently being investigated for? At Executive Protection Group Polygraph Service, we have been helping thousands of individuals for over 24 years, no matter who you are or what you have been accused of, with the highest accuracy, integrity, and overall compassion to everyone's needs. We are not your typical polygraph or lie detection service. At Executive Protection Group Polygraph Service, we are certified experts recognized in courts throughout the country, and we stand by our promise to give you full closure and all your needed answers. Call at 757-495-1301 and visit our website at www.executiveprotectiongrp.com to get started. What is the important aspect of your job that you tell your clients when you do tell them, this is what I'm going to do for you, this is that you're going to ease them. Not to say that you're going to win every case, because I'm sure you don't win all the time, but what do you tell them to make them feel like, hey, we're good. Everything's going smooth. Everything's going just the way, it's supposed to right now.
So just by doing what you just said.
Okay.
So what I find is one of the most stressful aspects of being accused of an offense in the military is this uncertainty and the loss of control. Typically, people in the military have a lot of ownership. They own their careers, they own their finances, they own their family. They take responsibility for those things and try to shape them to produce good outcomes. So when they're thrown into this situation with a ton of tremendous potential consequences, there's no control. They have no idea what's going on. They're just at a loss, and it's incredibly disruptive and disorienting for them. So I try to reassure them with knowledge. I try to tell them like, hey, here's where you are in the process. These are the kind of finite ranges of possible things that can happen to you. Yes, my job is not to get you off the hook or guarantee a specific result that's unethical. Attorneys cannot promise outcomes.
Right.
All I can do is work to add value and, again, put the government to their paces and make it as hard as possible for them to do anything and get the best outcome possible on the facts that we have.
Can you ease, as an attorney that represents a client, can you ease their burdens at their current commands if they're going through things? Or is it once they're charged or once they're being investigated, can you send letters to the command saying, leave them alone, they're being represented, or let them do their job while this is proceeding or anything of that nature?
Sure. I do. The command they're not obligated to respond to me or even read the letters I send.
Okay.
But what I do use frequently is a mechanism. It's Article 138 UCMJ.
Okay.
That's the right every military member has to complain and request redress from their CO. And their CO is obligated to respond within a period of time. And if they can't grant the request for redress, forward it up to the officer exercising general court-martial jurisdiction over them. So you get to ask for relief from your boss, and if your boss doesn't grant it, forward it up to the admiral or the general over them and ask them for redress. And they're required to respond in writing. And I use that as one of the most important rights that military members have. I file Article 138 complaints in almost every case I do.
Gotcha.
Not only might it work and you give your CO an opportunity, and it frequently does. A lot of times I do the step one, the request for redress, and COs say, oh, yep, didn't realize we were doing that, or, oh, nope, don't like that, and they'll fix it. So great, it worked. We fixed it. If it doesn't, I get the opportunity to make them put their rationale for hurting my client in writing. They have to defend what they're doing. And then I get the extra step of complaining to the higher-ups about what's going on. That is, like I said, almost every case.
And you represent, like I said in the beginning, you represent individuals on the civilian side as well.
Of course.
Other than the military.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's a different world than the military. But you represent them in the same fashion and passion, I take it.
Of course.
Exactly. What is the difference, if you can explain to the listeners, from civilian side of the courts or the charges or the investigations versus military individuals?
It's been fascinating. So I, became acquainted with the civilian side when I retired and I started, working and serving those clients. The civilian system relative to the military system is just much higher volume. So you get people and you're dealing with people day to day that, work with each other all the time. So the community is set, the courtroom community, kind of everybody knows each other. I think one of the other big differences is that what they think is bad is different. So in the military, they don't see a lot of misconduct. Okay. So when it happens, everybody's, it gets a lot of attention.
Right.
In the civilian side, people are more accustomed to seeing, especially low-level things that really constitute mistakes: speeding, reckless driving,
correct,
even a DUI. DUIs are terrible, and it's very risky. And certainly the judges are not happy when they're dealing with a DUI. I say not happy, they're morally offended or whatever. But there's just more of an appreciation. The results are more consistent. I'll put it that way.
I got you.
So there's kind of, they see the same sort of outcomes in the same sorts of cases.
And so the punishments are basically, they follow same guidelines in a way.
Sure. There's some of that. And at the misdemeanor level, you just have kind of what, there's this kind of sense of a going rate, where in the military, you don't really have that because there's just too many variables across the services. There's too many variables across the cases. The personality of the prosecutors is different. So it's a lot harder to tell clients, hey, here's what I think is going to happen in your case. A lot of the times it's just, there's all of the options are open and we really got to be ready for all of them. Whereas on the civilian side, it can be maybe a little bit more predictable.
Do you get the same kind of discovery as you would in the military that you do in the civilian side, or is it harder?
Oh, that's really interesting.
When it comes to evidence.
That's a great question. It could not be more different. The Commonwealth of Virginia's handling of discovery it's frustrating. They don't give you a lot. A lot of the military, like a lot of the police departments rely on FOIA for discovery, which I don't think is appropriate. Having a FOIA right to something is different than having a constitutional due process right to something. Okay. So those are different bases for having a right to see evidence.
I got you.
So, and I don't see that distinction really appreciated in the Commonwealth. But more often than not, I prefer the cases where there's a Commonwealth attorney on the case or an opposing counsel. You can work with them and get on the same page with evidence a little better. But in the military, that is one of the broadest discovery rights that I'm aware of. Okay. So the accused is entitled under Rule for Court Martial 701 to material that's relevant and necessary to defense preparations.
Wow.
Which is,
so you have everything prepared, what the prosecution's really has, and then.
Well, then I can go to the judge and argue for an order for the government to produce anything I think I need to prepare my case. Right. Not that I think is going to be admissible at trial or used by the government. Right. I mean, I get all that, but I get, extra things that I think I need to prepare.
And that's in a case that I dealt with, perfect case, whereas a sailor was accused of rape, which is, heinous, probably one of the most heinous, accusations a man could be accused of. Sure. And he was accused of this on board a Navy vessel, and NCIS investigated. The command, obviously took him off the ship immediately. They charged him. He took a polygraph test with the agents. And of course, they said several things. One, they said it was inconclusive on one test. Another test said that he failed. His JAG officers, because he had two of them at the time, because he was really facing a lot of seriousness, they asked me if I would review, because of, like you just said, the discovery. They got everything. Sure. And they sent me the investigative notes. They sent me the polygraph charts, and I reviewed them. And the mistakes that I saw was just horrendous. Sure. And the testing that they gave, he should not have gotten inconclusive. It's when I reviewed it, he passed. Right. And then the same with the one that they said he failed. Again, he passed. They presented that before, because like I said, court martials, they don't permit it, but they presented it ahead of time, which I guess was allowed or whatever. Right. And then they dismissed the charges, and they found out that she lied later. Sure. And of course, she was kicked out. So, wow. Like you just said, it's great that you get all that, because on the civilian side, you have to fight and argue. And when you go in front of the judge, Your Honor, we didn't get this, or we didn't, we've asked for it, but we didn't have it. So we asked for a continuance. And I'm sure that's what you often do.
Yeah. And a system that is such high volume, like the civilian system. So when I call, they don't really like novel discovery requests. So discovery requests for creative things I think I need to defend my client are typically not, we have to litigate those. So we're going to have to argue with the government about the question or my right to have it. And it's just a different right. So, and the motions practice in the civilian side is much narrower. So in the federal system and the military system, it's more formal, more akin to federal court, but it tends to be quite academic.
Right.
So you have a lot of motions.
Well, Marshall, in closing, I want to give you an opportunity before I tell my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I want to give you a very big opportunity to tell them, one, how they can reach you.
Sure.
Two, I want you to tell the listeners what you can do for them if they need you. And the podcast is all yours right now.
Hey, thanks a lot. So, the Griffin Law Firm, we represent civilian members of the federal government, so federal civilian employees. We do employment law. I also represent people who are facing an attack on their security clearance. So we do security clearance law, military medical practitioner defense, so credentialing defense. In addition to all of the main thing we do is the court martials, administrative separations. We help active duty members of the military. But I like to tell folks, if you are adverse to the federal government in the criminal or administrative space, then we're probably the right firm for you. We can probably help, and we'd like to. The best way to do that is to visit our website at www.griffinlawdefense.com and just register for a consult there. So consults for military and all the other, anything but family law is all free. So be happy to chat with you and get you going on next steps.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for tuning in to Inside the Polygraph with David Goldberg. I hope you got a lot out of this with an awesome guest, Marshall Griffin, and his awesome legal information that he gave you. As you know, he believes in polygraph testing, and that's a great attorney that would use it for his clients. There are attorneys out there that also use it, but before you talk, before you do anything, and you are in trouble with any legal entity, seek legal advice so that you can be represented properly. I hope this helps. Stay tuned for the next episode, and I wish you all the best. Thanks so much for listening. If you truly liked what you heard today, please be sure to rate the show, share with others, and subscribe for more episodes.